The sound of the dry leaves being crushed echoed through the silent forest, each step a reminder of the imminent danger. Tom, with firm and determined steps, felt lost amid a sentimental deluge. The force that moved him was uncontrollable, the weight of the past and future crushing him. He couldn't stop. His hands held tightly to a box containing 2 puppies. Bella, the golden retriever following him, was there, panting and injured, but determined not to let the worst happen. The creek roared in the background, the flowing water seeming to anticipate the dark fate approaching. Everything could end there, on that bank, if Tom took one more step. Between the shadows of the forest and the light of forgiveness, the journey of redemption of a man who needs to face himself to save the last spark of hope. The twilight shadows took over the forest when Tom's car abruptly stopped beside a deserted road, surrounded only by enormous trees and the distant sound of crickets. Bella, a golden retriever with a loving gaze, jumped out of the vehicle with a racing heart, but without understanding what was happening. She spun in circles, trying to follow her owner, who, in abrupt movements, slammed the car door with a pained and guilty expression. With a hardened look and without saying anything, he got out of the car, opened the trunk, and grabbed a cardboard box containing Bella's 2 puppies. The puppies began to cry, sensing the fear emanating from that man, as if they could predict what was to come. Bella was panting, running back and forth, starting to understand everything that was happening. "You only brought me problems," Tom yelled, his face twisted in an expression of hate. "I can't take this anymore." Bella, in panic, ran to the box, trying to protect her puppies, but was pushed away with a foot. He murmured something under his breath, and without any remorse, took the box towards the nearby creek, where the sound of the flowing water was the only company on that cold night. Bella, desperate, followed closely, her barks filled with anguish, echoing in the air. After Tom abandoned the box on the riverbank, without looking back, he returned to the car. Bella barked desperately, running around the car trying to get back inside. Tom, in one last gesture of pain, tore away in the car, leaving behind only dust and the distant echo of a broken heart. Bella ran down the road, barking and whimpering as if she could still catch up to him. But soon her tired paws and the instinct to protect her puppies made her give up the chase. She stood still for a moment, watching the taillights of the car disappear over the horizon, until silence reigned once more. Bella, who had always been a loyal and loving friend, could not understand why she was being left there in such a desolate place. So she returned to the box where her puppies were, her eyes filled with tears, trying to understand everything that was happening. Alone and directionless, she lay down beside the puppies, licking them and trying to calm them while the cold wind blew over them. Night fell quickly, and the shadows of the trees stretched over the road, heightening the sense of abandonment. Bella's despair was only the beginning of a suffering she had never imagined facing. But before all this happened, Bella lived in a small house on the outskirts of Charleston, where each morning was filled with the soft voice of Elaine. She was a middle-aged woman, sweet and attentive, who made a point of starting the day by petting Bella's golden fur while whispering words of affection. It was a time when Bella lived surrounded by love and care, running through the lawns and enjoying the delights prepared by Elaine. The connection between the two was palpable, and Bella always anxiously awaited Elaine's arrival, who would bring her special treats and spend long minutes talking with her, as if they were old friends. But this tranquility began to crumble when Tom, Elaine's husband, started to change. After Elaine's sudden death, something inside Tom broke. He, who was once a simple and hard-working man, began to drown in a pit of sadness and anger. The house that was once full of laughter and warmth was now shrouded in silence and shadows. Tom, isolated in his grief, spent long days without leaving his room, ignoring Bella's presence, who missed the affection she used to receive. As the days passed, Tom's sadness transformed into something darker. He started to drink. His words became harsh, and the patience he once had for Bella disappeared. She approached him, wagging her tail in anticipation, but was met with pushes and shouts. The food that was once placed in her bowl religiously began to run out. Bella went hungry, drinking the raindrops that fell in the backyard. Pregnant and helpless, she searched for something to satiate her hunger. but all she found was Tom's empty gaze, looking at her as if she were a burden he needed to rid himself of. With each passing day, Bella felt weaker, but the instinct to protect the life she carried inside her kept her standing. Tom's eyes, which once reflected love, were now filled with hatred. He didn't care for Bella's silent pleas for help, completely ignoring her as if she were just a ghost in the house. Bella knew something terrible was about to happen, but there was no way to avoid it. The only thing left for her was to protect her puppies, no matter the cost. And it was in this atmosphere of fear and despair that Bella saw her life change forever. And it did change, up until the day she was abandoned with her puppies in the middle of the forest. Back in the reality she now found herself in, Bella felt hunger tightening her stomach. Her puppies, newborn and fragile, were also beginning to cry, which only heightened the despair that was eating away at her inside. She knew she needed to find food, anything that could keep their lives going for another day. With her heart torn between the fear of leaving them alone and the urgency to find sustenance, Bella made a decision. She looked at her puppies, who were now sleeping exhausted, and headed towards the house where they had lived before the abandonment. Each step was a struggle against the instinct to return, but she had to keep going. When she arrived at the house, she realized it was in total disrepair, as desolate as Tom's heart. The smell of alcohol and decay filled the air. Bella, silent and cautious, entered through the back door, where the darkness was even more oppressive. Her eyes, adapted to the dimness, quickly found the food bowl, but it had been empty for days. Desperate, Bella began to sniff around, hoping to find some scraps, but all she managed to find were a few crumbs and leftovers on the floor. It was at that moment that Tom appeared in the kitchen, staggering. His red and bloodshot eyes widened at the sight of Bella there, so bold in invading his space. With a scream of fury, he grabbed the first thing he found, a worn-out old broom, and raised it in the air. Bella froze, terror consuming her. Tom shouted, moving quickly toward her. She had no choice but to run, but hunger and fatigue made it difficult to be fast. The broom came down hard, hitting her flank. A yelp of pain escaped Bella as she stumbled in her attempt to escape. With eyes glazed over with pain and fear, Bella managed to rise and ran out of the house, her paws slipping in the rain-soaked earth. Tom followed her to the door, shouting words of hatred, but he did not go beyond that. With her chest heaving, Bella ran back to her puppies, feeling the pain spread through her body. When she finally arrived, she snuggled next to them, carefully licking each one as the sound of their little whimpers pierced her heart. She knew she had to be strong, but she felt her strength waning. Dark clouds began to gather in the sky, heralding a storm. The wind picked up, and the first drops of rain fell, soaking the small makeshift shelter where Bella was hiding. Night came like a curtain of darkness, and soon the rain turned into a furious tempest. Lightning split the sky, and thunder made the ground tremble. Bella lay over her puppies, trying to protect them from the cold and the water that seeped in. She trembled, but she stood firm, knowing that now, more than ever, they needed her. Time seemed to drag as Bella fought to keep her puppies warm and safe. Her strength was almost gone, and the pain from Tom's blows still throbbed in her body. But she did not give up. With every thunderclap and gust of wind, Bella whispered to her puppies in silence, promising them that somehow everything would be all right. And on that night, in the midst of the storm, Bella became more than just a mother. She became a warrior, willing to fight against fate itself to save her puppies. Days passed, and the small town of Charleston, South Carolina, gained a new resident. Grace's arrival was like a fresh breeze on a hot day. She was a woman of serene appearance, with long brown hair cascading in waves over her shoulders. Her presence was understated, but there was something comforting in the way she walked, and in how her eyes captured the world around her. Grace was not an ordinary healer. Her passion for herbs and potions came from a long lineage of women who knew the secrets of nature. She decided to settle in town, opening a small shop filled with colorful jars, dried herbs, and crystals that sparkled in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Every day, Grace would leave her home early, with a wicker basket hanging from her arm, heading towards the nearby forest. It was there, among the ancient trees and the moss-covered ground, that she found the rare mushrooms and plants she used in her healing remedies. The townspeople began to talk about her, some with skepticism, others with curiosity. But Grace never cared what they said. She knew she had a greater purpose and trusted her intuition to guide her. One morning, while Grace was in the forest gathering some mushrooms for a new potion, she suddenly heard an unusual noise. She paused for a moment, trying to decipher the muffled sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the woods. Her instincts led her to follow the sound, until, upon reaching the edge of a creek, she saw something that broke her heart. On the banks of the creek, in a secluded corner, was Bella, the golden retriever, curled up next to her puppies. They looked weak and exhausted, and Bella's gaze was one of pure despair. Grace watched that scene for a moment, trying to understand what had happened. The pain in Bella's eyes was unmistakable, and Grace felt a tightness in her chest, seeing how the dog struggled to protect her puppies, even while clearly debilitated. Without hesitation, she approached slowly, speaking in a soft and soothing voice. "Hey, girl, it's okay, I won't hurt you." Bella lifted her head with difficulty, her eyes fixed on Grace, as if trying to gauge her intentions. When Grace crouched down and extended her hand, Bella hesitated, but exhaustion and desperation finally overcame her. She allowed Grace to come closer and stroke her head. "You must have been through so much," Grace whispered, feeling Bella's cold skin to the touch, a sign that she was too weakened to continue alone. As Grace examined the puppies, noticing how thin and frail they were, a wave of determination washed over her. "I will take care of you," she promised. It was not just a promise to Bella and her puppies, but also to herself. Something about the situation had awakened a profound sense of mission within her. Grace picked up one of the frailest puppies in her arms, feeling its light and irregular breathing against her chest. Carefully, she stood up, keeping Bella close with a welcoming gesture. "Let's go home. There you will be safe," she said, as she began the walk back along the forest trail, with Bella following closely behind, as if she knew that this woman was her last hope. At that moment, Grace had no idea that by bringing Bella and her puppies home, she was not only changing the fate of those animals, but also intertwining her path with something much larger and unknown. Grace took Bella and her puppies to her home, a small refuge surrounded by plants and herbs that she tended to with care. Once inside, Grace prepared a cozy space in the corner of the living room, with soft blankets and a bowl of fresh water. Bella, still wary, watched Grace's every move, but her eyes conveyed evident relief. She lay down with the puppies, finally allowing them to rest in a safe place, far from the suffering they had faced until then. Gradually, Bella began to understand that this new environment was different from anything she had ever experienced. With patience and care, Grace fed Bella generous portions of food, watching as she devoured each piece, hungry yet grateful. The bond between the two began to grow slowly, forged by the trust that Bella was rediscovering. Grace talked to her, sharing gentle stories while tending to her plants or preparing her potions. Bella seemed to listen attentively, her eyes following Grace's every gesture. In no time, Grace learned through old residents of the town that the animals she had adopted had been abandoned by Tom, a man who, after the death of his wife, had plunged into an abyss of pain and suffering. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Tom continued his spiral of self-destruction. The anger and resentment that had once been directed towards Bella and the puppies now turned inward. With no one left to blame, Tom isolated himself in his messy house, sinking deeper into alcohol and solitude. He knew he had lost everything: his wife, his dignity, and now even the animals that in some way were a remnant of his humanity. One night, as Grace stroked Bella, who was asleep next to her puppies, she thought of Tom. Grace had heard rumors about his life in the town, how he had changed since Elaine's death, and how his soul seemed to be in tatters. She knew that the abyss separating him from any kind of redemption seemed too vast to be crossed alone. But Grace also believed in the power of healing, not just for bodies but for hearts. And, as much as Tom had caused so much suffering, she felt that there was still something in him that could be saved, if he allowed it. As Grace watched Bella and her puppies, now stronger and more secure, she made a decision. Helping Bella and the puppies was just the beginning. She knew that to truly heal the wounds that had been opened, she would have to confront the darkness that still consumed Tom. But this would require more than she had done so far. It would demand a courage that she wasn't sure Tom still possessed. In the days that followed, the connection between Grace and Bella grew stronger. Bella, who used to flinch at the slightest abrupt movement, now followed Grace around the house, her eyes shining with a new life. The puppies were growing quickly, playing around as Grace watched them with a smile. But even amid this newfound peace, the thought of Tom wouldn't leave her alone. She knew she couldn't save everyone, but perhaps she could make a difference in the life of that broken man. And so as the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink, Grace decided that the time to act was approaching. She would care for Bella and the puppies, but she would also try to reach Tom before it was too late. The life she had helped save was now her responsibility, and Grace was ready to face any challenge that came her way, even if it meant diving into the darkness to bring back the light. Somehow she knew that at any moment she would have to confront her own fears. Yes, at any moment that would happen. A few days later, when the afternoon brought its last rays of sunlight, Grace decided to go to the forest to gather some herbs for infusion. When she reached the stream, she contemplated the dark waters reflecting the distant lights of the city. As she approached a little closer, she stopped in fright, noticing a figure hunched in the distance, almost imperceptible in the twilight. It was Tom. He was sitting by the water's edge, a bottle in hand, and a vacant gaze fixed on the horizon. Grace walked slowly, trying not to make a sound, but Bella, who was following her, began to sniff the air suspiciously. When they got close enough, Tom lifted his head, his eyes squinting as he tried to focus on the approaching figure. "What do you want?" he murmured, his voice hoarse and weary. Grace didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at him with a mix of compassion and firmness. "You don't have to keep living like this, Tom," she finally said, her voice calm and steady. "There's a way back if you want it." Tom laughed, but it was a bitter sound void of joy. "Back to where? There's nothing left for me now. I've ruined everything." "Not everything is lost," Grace insisted, sitting down beside him, unafraid of the darkness surrounding him. "You can start over, but for that, you need to want it. You need to fight for it." Tom turned to her, his eyes red from alcohol, and held back tears. "I hurt them. I abandoned them. How can I deserve a second chance?" Before Grace could reply, Bella cautiously approached, her eyes shining in the dim light of the moon. She observed Tom for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then, slowly and deliberately, Bella took a few steps forward and sat beside him. Her eyes, filled with a silent wisdom, met his. Bella extended her muzzle, gently touching Tom's arm in a gesture of silent but profound forgiveness. Tom swallowed hard, feeling the warmth of that gesture flood his heart. Why would she do that? After everything? His voice broke, the words getting lost in a sob he tried to suppress. Grace simply watched, her thoughts immersed in the conflicts that must arise in the mind of someone receiving generosity from those they have wronged. Grace leaned closer and placed her hand on his shoulder, offering support. "Because forgiveness is the first step toward healing, Tom. And if Bella can forgive you, maybe you can start forgiving yourself." The man who once seemed so lost and hardened was now unraveling before the simplicity of a gesture. He stroked Bella's head, feeling the soft fur beneath his fingers, and for the first time in a long while, a tear rolled down his face. "I want to try. I don't know if I can, but I want to try." Grace smiled, a smile filled with hope and promise. "That's all we need, Tom. The first step." Tom took a deep breath, as if the weight he had been carrying began to lighten. "I can't change what I did, but I can try to be better. Can I at least try to do something right just once?" Grace stood up, extending her hand to him. "Then let's do this together. Bella and I are with you." Tom looked at the outstretched hand and, with a hesitant yet resolute gesture, grasped it. He stood up, swaying slightly due to the alcohol, but the determination in his eyes was clear. With Bella on one side and Grace on the other, he took his first steps toward a new journey, a journey of redemption, healing, and perhaps, just perhaps, a new beginning. Tom woke up the next morning to the soft sunlight filtering through Grace's curtains. The surroundings felt almost unreal, with the air thick with the scent of herbs she kept throughout the house. He felt a slight headache, a remnant of the alcohol from the night before, but also something more, a clarity he hadn't experienced in a long time. He got up slowly, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders, but with a new determination taking root in his chest. Grace was in the kitchen, preparing something Tom couldn't identify right away. When she saw him, she smiled slightly but said nothing. Bella, who was lying on the floor next to her, lifted her head and looked at Tom with those eyes that had become so familiar and filled with silent acceptance. Tom approached cautiously, still unsure of how Bella would react, but when she extended her snout toward him, he felt a wave of emotion wash over him. I want to try to do the right things, Grace, he said, finally breaking the silence that seemed to hang between them. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but filled with sincerity. Grace paused what she was doing and looked at him, weighing her words. That's all we can ask for, Tom. One step at a time. In the days that followed, Tom worked hard to regain Bella's trust. He began helping Grace with small tasks around the house, learning to care for the puppies with patience and tenderness. Every gesture, every action, was an attempt to prove to himself that he could still be someone worthy of trust, someone capable of love and care. Bella, in turn, watched closely. At first she was cautious, keeping a certain distance, but slowly she began to come closer, trusting a little more with each passing day. Grace noticed the change in Tom. He was more present, more aware of his actions and how they affected others. The shadow that had once seemed to haunt him was beginning to dissipate, making way for a kinder version of himself, one that perhaps existed before Elaine left. Tom was still a man in recovery, battling his own demons, but now he had a purpose: protecting Bella and her puppies, and perhaps redeeming himself for his past mistakes. One morning, while feeding the puppies, Tom felt Bella approach from behind. She rested her head on his lap, something she hadn't done since Grace had brought him home. Tom paused what he was doing, and for a moment just stayed there, feeling the warmth of Bella's body against his. It was a simple gesture, but for Tom it meant more than he could express in words. He knew there was still much to be done, much to heal, but in that moment, he felt he was on the right path. Grace watched the scene from across the room, a soft smile on her face. She knew Tom's transformation was still ongoing, but the true change had begun. It was the start of a new journey, a journey he wouldn't have to face alone. And as Tom continued to work alongside Bella and under Grace's watchful eye, he began to feel something he had lost long ago. The autumn sun cast its last rays over Grace's house, tinting the sky with a soft golden hue that reflected the peace now reigning there. Tom was on the porch watching Bella and her puppies play on the lawn, while Grace tended to her plants in the garden next door. He felt a sense of tranquility that he hadn't experienced in a long time, as if the shadows of his past were finally dissipating. Each day was a step in Tom's journey of transformation. Under Grace's attentive and patient gaze, he began to rediscover parts of himself he thought were lost. He learned to reconnect with the world, starting with small gestures, caring for the puppies, helping Grace around the house, and most importantly, rebuilding Bella's trust. The dog, who once feared him, now accepted his presence more easily, and the puppies, whom he had abandoned, ran to him with youthful joy. One afternoon, while Tom and Grace walked through the forest, the sound of leaves under their feet and the gentle rustling of the wind among the trees created a moment ripe for a deep conversation. "I never thought it would be possible to feel this way again," Tom said, his voice low, almost as if confessing a secret. "For a long time I held on to pain, onto guilt, but now it feels like I'm finally starting to leave that behind." Grace smiled at him, with the same serenity she always carried. "Pain is a part of us, Tom, but it doesn't have to define us. What you do with that pain is what really matters, and you have chosen the path of healing." They continued walking in silence for a few moments, until Tom stopped and turned to her, with an expression of gratitude. "I couldn't have done this alone. You and Bella, You both gave me a second chance. I was completely lost." Grace shook her head gently. "It wasn't just us, Tom. You found strength within yourself. And that strength is what will carry you forward." As they returned home, the feeling of belonging that Tom experienced was undeniable. He knew there was still much work to do, that the journey of redemption was not a straight line, but filled with ups and downs. Even so, he was determined to continue, knowing he was no longer alone. Bella was now approaching him with confidence, and the puppies, grown and full of energy, were the living symbol of his new life. Amidst it all, Tom realized that a feeling for Grace was blossoming within him. Yes, they were friends. There was also gratitude. But it seemed there was something even greater. As months passed, Grace's house transformed into a true home, not only for the animals, but for Tom as well. He and Grace formed a true team, working together to ensure that Bella and her puppies had the best possible future. They planned the dogs' meals, created safe spaces for them to play, and above all cultivated an environment of love and acceptance. Tom's presence was comforting for Grace. She realized that even a heart covered in wounds can be polished to reveal the gem it truly is. Finally, on a clear morning, while Tom was feeding the puppies, he noticed something that surprised him, a genuine feeling of peace. He realized that despite all the suffering and pain, he had found a new purpose. And that purpose was there in Bella's bright eyes, in Grace's comforting presence, and in the feeling that he had finally found his way back to himself. Tom's story was not just about redemption, but about the ability to start over, to find light even in the darkest hours. The cycle of guilt and pain he believed to be unbreakable had been interrupted by the power of forgiveness and unconditional love. And now, beside Grace, he could see a future that once seemed impossible. At the end of that journey, Grace and Tom sat on the porch, watching the puppies play in the garden, now bigger and stronger, with Bella always vigilant, caring for them like a devoted mother. "We did it," Tom said with a calm satisfaction in his voice. "Yes," Grace replied, with a gentle and serene smile. "But this is just the first of many journeys. What comes next is just as important as what we left behind." And so they looked toward the horizon, knowing that together they could face whatever the future brought. Tom had found the peace he had long sought, and with it, the certainty that there is always a chance to start over. And that certainty was what drove him forward, with his heart finally light and ready to embrace whatever life had in store for them. We hope this story touched your heart. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave your like to help the channel grow. Subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our emotional stories. Share your own stories, suggestions, and feedback in the comments. We want to hear from you. And of course, spread this message of hope to those who need it. Until next time.